The final buzzer sounded. The Indiana Fever had won. The crowd was still loud. The players were celebrating. The victory was secured. Everything was good. Everything should have been simple. But then something happened. A post-game comment. Just a few words from Stephanie White. A coach doing what coaches do after a win. She was talking about the game. She was talking about her team. She was talking about what she saw on the floor. And somewhere in those comments, she praised Kelsey Mitchell. She talked about Mitchell's impact. She talked about Mitchell's performance. She talked about a teammate stepping up when it mattered. A completely normal thing for a coach to say. Except the basketball world didn't see it that way. Because within hours, the internet exploded. Social media went crazy. Articles appeared. Videos started spreading. And suddenly people weren't talking about the victory anymore. They were talking about one thing and one thing only. Why didn't Stephanie White mention Caitlin Clark? Why did Kelsey Mitchell get the spotlight? And most dramatically, was Stephanie White showing disrespect to the biggest star in women's basketball? A simple post-game comment became a national controversy. A normal coaching answer became a headline. And what should have been a celebration of a team win became a debate that divided basketball fans into two camps. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. This story is so much more complicated than it looks. This story isn't about hatred. It's not about disrespect. This story is about something far more interesting. It's about expectations. It's about perception. It's about what happens when one player becomes so famous, so dominant, so globally recognized that every single word spoken around her gets analyzed like it's a courtroom testimony. This is the story of how a coach's comment about one player became a conversation about an entirely different player. And why that says something really important about where women's basketball is right now. Let's go back to the moment it all started. The game had just ended. The Fever had secured an important victory. It was the kind of win that matters in the middle of a season. It was the kind of win that builds momentum. It was the kind of win that shows a team can execute under pressure. So naturally, reporters gathered around Stephanie White. That's what happens after every basketball game. Coaches sit down and answer questions. Players sit down and answer questions. Everyone talks about what happened. Everyone analyzes the game. And everyone tries to understand why one team won and the other team lost. It's standard. It's normal. It's what happens in professional sports every single night. But something was different about this moment. Because this game involved Caitlin Clark. And when Caitlin Clark is involved in anything, the stakes feel higher. The attention feels more intense. The words get examined more carefully. That's just the reality of her presence in the basketball world right now. So when Stephanie White started talking about the game, people were listening extra carefully. They were analyzing every sentence. They were looking for clues. They were trying to understand what she really meant. And that's when it happened. White talked about Kelsey Mitchell. She talked about Mitchell's performance. She talked about Mitchell's contributions. She talked about the moments when Mitchell came through. And she made it clear that Mitchell had played an important role in securing the victory. Now, this shouldn't have been controversial. Mitchell did play an important role. She did come through. She did contribute in significant ways. Multiple players performed well in this game. That's how basketball works. Multiple people contribute to victories. But the moment White started talking about Mitchell without constantly bringing the conversation back to Clark, people reacted. Not everyone. Not most people. But enough people that social media started noticing. Enough people that the conversation started building. Enough people that what started as a normal post-game interview became a controversy that would dominate basketball discussions for days. The reactions came in different waves. First, there was confusion. People were wondering if they heard it right. Did the coach really not mention Clark more? Second, there was disagreement. Some people thought White was right to highlight Mitchell. Others thought Clark deserved more credit. Third, there was outrage. Some fans felt disrespected on Clark's behalf. They felt like she wasn't getting proper acknowledgement. They felt like her impact was being minimized. And from there, The situation just exploded. Videos appeared claiming that Stephanie White was disrespecting Caitlin Clark. Articles appeared analyzing the comment. People started picking sides. Some defended White completely. Some criticized her completely. And somewhere in the middle, the actual basketball game got completely lost in the conversation. What started as one coach praising one player turned into a national debate about another player. Think about that for a second. That's not normal. That's a very specific phenomenon. And it only happens because of one person. Caitlin Clark. Because here's what's important to understand. This isn't really a story about what Stephanie White said. This is a story about what Caitlin Clark has become. And what she's become is unlike almost anything we've seen before in women's basketball. She's not just a great player. She's a phenomenon. She's a superstar that transcends the sport. She draws attention that most athletes never experience. Everywhere she goes, cameras follow. Everywhere she plays, stadiums fill up. Everywhere her name appears, clicks follow. She's achieved a level of fame that used to be exclusive to the biggest names in men's basketball. LeBron James level fame. Stephen Curry level fame. The kind of fame where one comment about you can become a major story. The kind of fame where one post-game interview becomes national news. And that creates a very specific pressure. Because when you're that famous, every word spoken around you gets examined. Every reaction gets analyzed. Every quote gets scrutinized. And that's exactly what happened here. Some fans heard Stephanie White's comments and they heard a coach highlighting a strong performer. They thought it was perfectly reasonable. Mitchell played well. White acknowledged it. End of story. But other fans heard the same comments and they heard something completely different. They heard what wasn't being said. They heard the relative lack of emphasis on Clark. They heard what they perceived as Clark not getting enough credit. Both groups heard the exact same words. But they interpreted them in completely different ways. Why? Because they were listening through different filters. One filter said, "This is normal coaching behavior." The other filter said, "This is disrespect to our player." And when you apply those two filters to the same comment, you get two completely different conclusions. That's the fascinating part of this story. It's not really about what White said. It's about how different people interpret the same statement based on their own expectations. And Caitlin Clark creates expectations unlike anyone else in women's basketball right now. Let's think about what Kelsey Mitchell actually did in this game. Because this isn't about Mitchell being bad or undeserving of credit. Mitchell played well. When the team needed buckets, she found them. When pressure increased, she stayed aggressive. When defenders closed in, she kept attacking. By the end of the night, Mitchell had delivered several important moments. That's basketball reality. Some nights your star player does everything. Other nights your supporting cast steps up. Both things matter. Both things help you win. Both things deserve recognition. But here's the thing that's so interesting about modern sports culture. When a supporting player has a good game and the star player is on the same team, the default expectation has become that the star player should dominate the post-game conversation. It doesn't matter if the supporting player was actually more important to that specific victory. It doesn't matter if they hit bigger shots in more crucial moments. If the star is on the court, the star is expected to be the main topic. Anything less feels unusual. And unusual feels controversial. That's the world that Caitlin Clark has created. Not intentionally. But it's happening nonetheless. Think about a normal scenario in professional sports. If a coach praises a role player or supporting player after a win, people accept that. They move on. They understand that different players contribute in different ways. But put Caitlin Clark on that same team, and suddenly the expectations change. If the coach doesn't emphasize Clark, if the post-game conversation doesn't revolve primarily around Clark, if the headlines don't focus mainly on Clark, something feels off. People start asking questions. People start analyzing. People start debating whether the superstar is getting enough respect. That's the unique phenomenon of being as famous as Caitlin Clark. Your presence changes the expectations around everything. Your involvement in anything makes ordinary situations become extraordinary. One coach praised one player, and it became a national story. Not because the coach said anything controversial, but because the most famous player wasn't the main focus. That's how powerful Clark's presence has become. Now let's talk about what this situation says about expectations in professional basketball. Because this is important. Good teams need multiple contributors. Great teams need role players who step up. Championships are built by entire rosters, not individual players doing everything alone. Stephanie White, as a coach, understands this. She knows that victories require teamwork. She knows that different players need to contribute different things. She knows that sometimes your star player sets things up for others to score. Sometimes your role players make the biggest shots. Sometimes your bench players change the momentum. All of it matters. All of it deserves recognition. From a coaching perspective, what Stephanie White did was completely normal. She recognized a strong performance. She highlighted a player who deserved credit. She reinforced confidence in a teammate. That's basic coaching. That's how you build team culture. That's how you make sure multiple players feel valued and important. But here's the complication. When your roster includes Caitlin Clark, basic coaching sometimes looks different to the outside world. Because the outside world has different expectations. The outside world is used to Clark being the center of attention. The outside world is used to Clark being the main story. And when she isn't, it registers as unusual. Does that mean Stephanie White did anything wrong?
No.
Does it mean she was being disrespectful?
No.
It just means she did something normal in an environment where normal has changed because of Clark's presence. That's the real story. It's not about hate. It's not about disrespect. It's about how one player's fame has fundamentally altered expectations around everyone and everything connected to her. Let's also consider the pressure that Stephanie White is under. Because coaches today are in an impossible position. Every answer gets analyzed. Every quote gets examined. Every reaction gets debated. If White had given all the credit to Clark, some people would have complained that Mitchell wasn't getting enough recognition. If White had ignored Clark entirely, everyone would have called it disrespectful. No matter what a coach does or says, someone will be upset. That's modern sports. That's social media. One comment becomes 10,000 debates. Context disappears. Nuance disappears. And suddenly a complex situation gets reduced to a simple narrative. The coach either loves her player or hates her player. The coach either respects her star or disrespects her star. It's either or. Everything becomes a battle. But reality is almost always more complicated than that. Reality usually involves multiple truths existing at the same time. Stephanie White can praise Kelsey Mitchell. Caitlin Clark can still be incredibly valuable. A coach can recognize role players. A coach can still appreciate their star. All of these things can be true simultaneously. But the way modern conversations unfold, they can't. Everything has to be a choice. Everything has to be a side. Everything has to be either celebration or criticism. There's no middle ground. And that's where so much of the unnecessary controversy comes from. Not from what's actually being said, but from the way the conversation gets processed. Now let's talk about something else that's important. What about Kelsey Mitchell? Because in all of this debate about Caitlin Clark, sometimes Mitchell gets lost in the conversation. Mitchell played well. Mitchell contributed significantly. Mitchell made important plays. And Mitchell is probably watching all of this and thinking, I just had a good game. I just helped my team win. And instead of people talking about my performance, everyone is arguing about somebody else. That has to be frustrating. That has to be difficult. Because Mitchell is a good basketball player. Mitchell has worked hard. Mitchell has earned the right to be recognized when she plays well. And yet, because of Caitlin Clark's presence, even Mitchell's strong performance becomes secondary. It becomes a footnote in a larger conversation. That's not really Mitchell's fault. That's just the reality of playing on the same team as one of the most famous athletes in the world. Think about what it must be like for role players on Caitlin Clark's team. You play hard. You do your job. You contribute to a victory. But no matter what you do, the conversation is always about Clark. Even when you have a great game, the next day's headlines are about Clark. Even when you hit the biggest shot, people are still talking about what Clark could have done. Even when you help secure a victory, people are analyzing how Clark influenced that victory. It's a unique pressure. And it's not something most athletes have to deal with. In most teams, good performances by role players get highlighted. Those moments get celebrated. But on the Fever, everything gets filtered through the lens of Caitlin Clark. And that probably isn't fair to the other players. But that's the world they've chosen to be part of. That's the price of playing alongside one of the biggest stars in basketball. So did Stephanie White intentionally disrespect Caitlin Clark with her post-game comments? Based on everything that's been reported, the answer is no. White praised one player who played well. That's it. That's the entire story. But did her comments create controversy? Yes. Did her words get interpreted in multiple ways? Yes. Did some people feel like Clark didn't get enough credit? Yes. All of those things happened. But those things happening don't mean White was disrespectful. They just mean that the presence of Caitlin Clark has fundamentally changed how post-game interviews get received and analyzed. When Clark is involved in anything, expectations change. When Clark is on the floor, the standard for what counts as adequate recognition shifts. When Clark is part of the team, a normal coaching comment becomes a national debate. That's not a judgment on anyone. That's just reality. And here's what's interesting about this whole situation. It reveals something true about sports in the modern era. We've never really seen a female athlete with this level of presence before. We've never seen a women's basketball player command this much attention. We've never seen this level of scrutiny applied to every word spoken about a female athlete. So we're all kind of figuring this out in real time. We're all learning what it means when one player becomes so famous that everything around her becomes magnified. We're all discovering that there are new rules and new expectations that come with this level of fame. And those new rules are creating situations like this one, where a completely normal coaching comment becomes a controversial headline, where a player praising a teammate becomes a story about a different teammate, where basketball gets lost in the noise of celebrity. That said, this situation also highlights something important about Caitlin Clark's impact. Because only a truly special player could create this dynamic. Only a truly transcendent talent could change the way entire post-game interviews are perceived. Only a player at Clark's level of fame could make people wonder if she's getting enough credit when she's simultaneously putting up elite statistics and leading her team to victories. The level of attention Clark commands isn't normal. But it also isn't unwelcome in most circles. Because attention means interest. Interest means fans. Fans mean growth for women's basketball. So even though situations like this one might seem unnecessary or dramatic, they're also part of what's making women's basketball bigger and more popular than it's ever been. Caitlin Clark's fame comes with complications. But it also comes with incredible opportunities for the sport. What we're really seeing here is women's basketball entering a new phase. A phase where one player can completely change expectations. A phase where post-game quotes become national news. A phase where the dynamics of team success get reframed around one person's presence. It's a new dynamic. It's a unique dynamic. And it's probably going to continue intensifying as Clark's career goes forward. Because as she wins more, as her statistics get more impressive, as her legend grows, the spotlight will only get brighter. And every comment connected to her will only get more analyzed. That's just the trajectory of what happens when you're this famous. Everything gets amplified. Everything gets examined. Everything becomes potentially controversial. The reality of this situation is that the Fever won. That should be the story. Multiple players contributed. That should be the story. The team executed well under pressure. That should be the story. But because Caitlin Clark is Caitlin Clark, those things become secondary to the larger question of whether Clark is getting adequate recognition. Is that fair? Probably not. But it's real. And it's going to keep happening. Because the next game is coming. The next post-game interview is coming. The next quote is coming. And if we've learned anything from the last year, we know that when Caitlin Clark is involved, even the most ordinary comment can become the biggest story in basketball.